What drives a person to vanish into the unknown? For some, it's ambition. For others, obsession. But for a rare few, it's something harder to define, a feeling, a pull, a whisper from the past that refuses to be silenced. Throughout history, there have been men and women who disappeared after uncovering something extraordinary, not in the ordinary sense of loss or failure, but in moments that seemed to hover just beyond understanding, moments when discovery met disappearance and the story was swallowed whole. This is a journey into those moments. Our world still hides secrets. From the labyrinths beneath the jungle canopy to the frozen voids of the Antarctic, the Earth holds stories far older than our maps, older even than our myths. Sometimes those stories are glimpsed, a carved symbol on a cave wall, a strange anomaly buried in ice, a whisper in an ancient dialect. But just as often, the moment of discovery is the last anyone hears. This series explores 10 such stories, 10 explorers who were on the cusp of uncovering something astonishing. Ancient cities, sealed passages, sacred houses never meant for outsiders, and just as suddenly, silence. What unites these accounts isn't just mystery. It's a pattern, a final journal entry, a cryptic radio transmission, a moment of exhilaration followed by nothing. In many cases, the physical evidence they carried, photographs, samples, maps, journals, vanished along with them. Accidents, we're told, misadventure, nature's cruelty, but the similarities whisper otherwise. We are not here to offer conspiracy, or fantasy, or fear. Only questions, deep ones. What if our understanding of history is limited not by what we lack, but by what was taken? What if the truth lies buried not in data, but in stories erased, explorers silenced at the threshold of revelation? This is not a tale of glory. There are no triumphant returns. These are not the legends of those who conquered Everest or charted the poles. These are the hushed echoes of those who went looking for something, and may have found more than they were meant to. Over the next 14 chapters, we'll step into their shoes, follow their paths, trace the last words they left behind, and try, as best we can, to understand what it means to find something that defies explanation. Each story begins with a mystery, ends with a question, and in between, perhaps, a glimpse of something forgotten. This is not about what was found. It's about what was lost, and why. It begins in the Amazon, nearly a century ago, with a man who believed he had found the remnants of an ancient civilization. He called it the City of Z. The jungle breathed secrets. In 1925, Colonel Percy Fawcett stood at the edge of the Brazilian Amazon, eyes fixed on the horizon where the dense green swallowed the sky. A seasoned British explorer and mapmaker, Fawcett had heard whispers for years, tales passed from tribe to tribe of towering stone cities hidden deep within the foliage. He believed there was truth in those whispers. He called the lost city Z. He wasn't chasing gold or glory. He was chasing proof that the jungle had once nurtured a sophisticated, ancient civilization lost to time and soil. Fawcett had pored over old manuscripts, especially one from 1753, written by a Portuguese explorer who claimed to have stumbled upon immense stone ruins. These weren't myths to Fawcett. They were evidence. His final expedition was different. No fanfare, no massive entourage. Just his 21-year-old son Jack, Jack's friend Raleigh, and himself. A small, quiet group. Fawcett believed that was the only way to reach the hidden city, to move lightly, to listen. In April 1925, they departed from the town of Cuiabá. Through the dense underbrush, swollen rivers, and suffocating heat, they sent dispatches back to Fawcett's wife. The tone was hopeful. They were making progress. Locals had spoken of ruins to the east. The maps grew blank, but Fawcett's resolve only deepened. Then, on May 29th, From the territory of the Kalapalo people, he sent his last known message: "The city is close. I can feel it. The Indians speak of ruins to the east. We head there tomorrow." And then, nothing. No screams, no distress calls, just silence. Over the next decades, at least 13 expeditions tried to find them. More than 100 people died in the effort. Bones were found, but none matched. Rumors flickered like fireflies that they'd been killed by hostile tribes, that they'd succumbed to the jungle, that they'd chosen to stay. But there was something else. Modern archaeology, aided by satellite imagery, began uncovering traces of complex earthworks and settlements in the Amazon basin. Grids of ancient roads, geometric structures hidden beneath the canopy, just where Fawcett believed Z would be. What if he had been right? His disappearance wasn't just a tragedy. It was a threshold, a doorway between what we know and what remains concealed. His final words hint at nearness. His silence suggests suddenness. We often assume that disappearance is defeat. But maybe, just maybe, Fawcett crossed into something he couldn't return from. Not because he failed, but because he succeeded. And perhaps the jungle keeps its promises. But only once. The trail disappears here. The next story begins not in a jungle, but in the silent stone canyons of Utah, where a young artist named Everett Ruess followed ancient symbols into the desert and never came back. The desert doesn't echo. It absorbs. In November 1934, 20-year-old Everett Ruess vanished into the red canyons of southern Utah. A poet, painter, and wanderer, Ruess had spent the better part of his young life exploring the American Southwest, drawn to its silence, its vastness, its secrets etched into stone. He was no ordinary traveler. Raised in Los Angeles, classically educated, fluent in literature and Latin, Ruess was as much philosopher as adventurer. He traveled alone, accompanied only by two burros, his sketchbooks, and his thoughts. For him, the desert wasn't empty. It was alive with messages left by the ancients. Before his disappearance, he sent a letter to his brother. It was poetic, cryptic, and strange. "I have been discovering so much," he wrote. "The ancients here left more than ruins. They left messages. I'm following the symbols to something remarkable." He signed the letter Nemo, Latin for no one. Then he walked into the wilderness and was never seen again. Weeks later, searchers found his camp in Davis Gulch. The scene was unsettling. His burros were alive, secured in a handmade corral. His gear was neatly arranged, not abandoned in haste, but as if carefully left behind. The word Nemo was carved into the rock nearby. No tracks, no body, no trace. Ruess's journals were missing, along with his artwork and supplies. Theories spread like desert wind, that he fell, that he was murdered, that he joined a Native American tribe, even that he faked his death and started anew. In 2009, bones were found and briefly thought to be his. DNA proved otherwise. What haunts about Everett Ruess isn't just his disappearance. It's the transformation that seemed to precede it. The shift in tone, the signature Nemo, the sense that he was walking not toward danger, but toward destiny. He believed he had found something, a message in the stones, a meaning woven into the petroglyphs and ruins left by the ancestral Puebloans. He wrote of following symbols, of a discovery that would change him. And then, like the symbols themselves, he vanished into sandstone and myth. Some say the desert took him, others say he became part of it. Perhaps that's what he wanted all along. To become no one, to leave behind the world of names and numbers and step into the eternal silence. From the canyons of the Southwest, we now move to a land of swamps and spirit houses, where a young Rockefeller heir, thousands of miles from home, sought the sacred objects of an ancient tribe and never returned. The river carried more than water. In 1961, Michael Rockefeller, son of the powerful New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, vanished off the coast of New Guinea. He was just 23. Educated, curious, and driven by a fascination with tribal art, Michael wasn't content to live a life of inherited wealth. He wanted to understand something older, something deeper, and so he went to the other side of the world. He immersed himself among the Asmat people, a remote tribe known for intricate wood carving and a spiritual world alive with ancestors and sacred symbols. He wasn't just visiting, he was earning their trust. His journal spoke of deepening relationships, of breakthroughs. On November 18th, he wrote, "Tomorrow they're taking me to see the sacred house, the place where they keep the objects no outsider has ever seen. This will be the find of a lifetime." On November 19th, his boat capsized. Michael's companion waited for help, but Michael, determined and confident, tied 2 empty fuel cans to his waist and swam for shore. He was never seen again. The official story was simple. He drowned or perhaps was taken by sharks. But stories surfaced almost immediately of something else. Locals whispered that he had reached the shore, that he had entered the village, that he had, perhaps, seen too much. Years later, journalist Carl Hoffman uncovered evidence that Michael may have indeed set foot on land, and more, that he might have taken something from the sacred house, not in theft, but perhaps in awe. Objects never meant to be handled by outsiders. There were suggestions the boat accident wasn't an accident at all, that it was a cover, that Michael had already been to the sacred house, that what he found there and what he took sealed his fate. The Asmat lived in a world where the boundary between the living and the ancestral is thin, where objects are not merely art but vessels, guardians. And when something is disturbed, that balance can fracture. Michael Rockefeller walked into a place few outsiders ever approached, not just physically, but spiritually. He sought understanding. He may have found it, but at a cost. No remains were ever confirmed, no artifacts returned. Only his words, preserved in a journal. This will be the find of a lifetime. The current carried his body away. Or maybe not. From the riverbanks of New Guinea, we now ride the rapids of the Colorado River, where 2 newlyweds ventured into the canyons of the Grand Canyon and found something that shouldn't have existed. The river was calm, too calm. In the fall of 1928, Glenn and Bessie Hyde, a young couple chasing adventure, set out to raft through the Grand Canyon. They were newlyweds, dreamers, determined to make history as the first married couple to navigate the treacherous canyon waters together. But their journey wasn't just about the rapids. They were documenting something else. On November 18th, they stopped at Hermit Creek and met a group of hikers. They shared stories, photographs, and excitement. Glenn spoke of a discovery they had made in one of the side canyons. Something unusual, something man-made, in a place where nothing should have been. A place that shouldn't exist, Glenn called it. A hidden chamber, a structure cut into stone, perhaps ancient, certainly unexpected. Bessie added that they had taken photographs and planned to share their findings after completing the expedition. They left the next morning. Neither was ever seen again. On December 1st, their raft was found adrift in a calm section of the river. Perfectly intact, supplies untouched, food neatly stored. But Glenn and Bessie were gone. And so was their camera. And their journal. No signs of an accident, no capsized boat, no indication that they'd fallen into the water. Just absence. The Grand Canyon has long whispered of secrets, stories passed down from native tribes and early explorers of vast cave systems, underground chambers, and ancient structures buried deep within the rock. Places not found on maps, places not meant to be found. What did the Hydes discover in that side canyon? Was it merely coincidence that the very items they used to document their find, the photographs, the journal, vanished with them? Many believe their disappearance was simply the result of misjudged rapids or a tragic fall. But the intact raft tells another story, one of calm, not chaos, of order, not accident. The hides were careful, deliberate, and excited about what they had seen. Then, silence. Some believe they were silenced. Others think they chose not to return. A canyon can hide anything, a secret, a truth, a pair of names carved into rock, slowly worn away by time. From the sculpted stone of Arizona, we now climb into the mist-veiled mountains of Peru, where a forgotten city waited in the clouds, and a sealed passage was opened, just once, before all went quiet. Mist clings to the mountains like memory. In 1953, Peruvian archaeologist Professor Artemio Guen led an expedition into the cloud forests of northern Peru, a land suspended between jungle and sky. He was searching for remnants of the Chachapoya, an enigmatic people known as the Warriors of the Clouds, who once built stone cities high above the world. For weeks, Guen's team climbed ridges wrapped in fog, following fragments of legend and traces of stonework swallowed by moss. On September 12th, the breakthrough came. Over the radio, Guen's voice trembled with excitement. "We found it, the lost city, and something else, a sealed entrance in the cliff face. We're going to investigate tomorrow." The next morning, at precisely 11 a.m., came the final transmission. "We've opened the entrance. It was sealed with stones. Inside, there's..." Then static. When a rescue team finally reached the site 2 weeks later, the camp was abandoned. Tents still stood, gear lay scattered, food half-eaten, but the team was gone. The entrance Guen had spoken of was real, a dark opening carved into the mountain, geometric and deliberate, its stonework unmistakably crafted. Inside, the rescuers followed a narrow passage 50 meters into the cliff before it ended in a collapse. No sign of Guen or his team. No blood, no bodies. Just silence. The Peruvian government sealed the site. No further excavations were permitted. The region was declared restricted. Too unstable, they said, but questions hung in the air like the fog itself. If a collapse had trapped the team, why was the entrance untouched? Why did the camp look hastily left, not by panic, but by urgency? In Guen's notes, retrieved from base camp, he had written about the Chachapoya legends, of sleeping ones, stone guardians, and doorways to other realms. He didn't take them literally. Until, perhaps, he did. What had they seen in that sealed chamber? His final words. "Inside, there's..." cut off, leaving an echo more powerful than any answer. The cloud forests keep their secrets. They're not like deserts or rivers. They don't bury or wash away. They simply absorb, fold inward, and disappear into the mist. From Peru's veiled ridges, we travel now to a colder silence, deep beneath Iceland's frozen crust, where a lone geologist descended into a cave system and found walls etched with symbols that shouldn't have existed. Beneath the lava, something waited. In June of 1999, Sarah Johansson, a 32-year-old Norwegian geologist and seasoned cave explorer, entered a lava tube system deep in Iceland's interior. She wasn't new to isolation or risk. For years, she had mapped volcanic formations across Europe, always methodical, always prepared. But this cave was different. On June 23rd, she made a satellite call to base camp. Her voice was calm, but charged with something more. Wonder. "I found a passage not on any survey maps," she said. "It goes much deeper than it should. The rock is different. And there are markings, symbols carved into the walls. I'm following it. This could be significant." She promised to check in every 4 hours. She never called again. The rescue team followed her documented route. The lava tube was familiar terrain, mapped, predictable. But then they reached the new passage, marked with Johansson's reflective tape, a narrow tunnel descending at a steep angle, cutting through layers of ancient rock. About 300 meters in, they found her rope, still anchored, still secure, but cut. Not frayed, not snapped. Cut cleanly, as with a blade. Beyond the rope, there were no signs, no gear, no boot prints, no trail, just deeper darkness. The cave became unstable past that point. Too narrow, too fragile. The team turned back. Why would Johansen cut her own rope? She was cautious, disciplined. Cutting the rope would have left her without a lifeline, a dangerous, uncharacteristic move. Unless someone else had done it. But she was alone. The only other people within miles were her own team, all accounted for. 4 years later, in 2003, a caver named Erik Thorsen claimed he found the same passage. He described geometric carvings, symbols worn by time, but unmistakably artificial, older than Viking, maybe Bronze Age. He tried to return with a team, but permits were denied. The cave was declared unstable. Johansen had spoken of significance, of something that didn't fit the geological story. A different kind of rock, a different kind of silence. Perhaps she found what she was looking for, or perhaps it found her. The Icelandic interior is not gentle. It doesn't scream when something vanishes. It simply closes around it, quietly, with snow and stone. From the cold stone corridors of Iceland, we journey now to the coast of North Carolina, where a team investigating one of America's oldest mysteries found their own trail and then became part of it. Sometimes, to solve a mystery, you must become one. In October 2004, a small research team traveled to Rowanoke Island, North Carolina, ground zero for one of America's most enduring enigmas, the Lost Colony. In 1587, over 100 English settlers vanished without a trace. When Governor John White returned 3 years later, he found only a single word carved into a post, Croatoan. Dr. Marcus Webb, a historian from the University of North Carolina, believed he had found something overlooked, a trail hidden not in documents but in symbols and marked trees mentioned in early accounts. Along with 2 fellow researchers and a documentary filmmaker, Webb set out to follow that trail inland. On October 19th, he left a voicemail for a colleague. His voice was electric. "We found it. We found where they went. There's a marked tree, just like John White described, leading to a site inland. We're going tomorrow. This solves the mystery." That call was his last. 4 days later, authorities found the team's rental car at a trailhead near the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. Inside were their belongings, tents, food, computers, even unused supplies. Missing were their cameras, research notes, and Dr. Webb's field journal. And the team itself vanished. Search teams scoured the refuge, over 150,000 acres of dense wetlands, forests, and tangled underbrush. No bodies, no campsites, no footprints, just silence, stretching on for years. Webb had been secretive. He'd withdrawn a large sum of cash before the trip. He hadn't told the university the exact location they were investigating. His office notes were vague, coordinates, symbols, suggestions of a route, but no map. What had they found out there? What had they followed? Some believe they simply got lost. Others suggest they may have stumbled upon something they weren't meant to. A burial site, a sacred area, something tied to the fate of the original colony. And then there's the deeper echo. In 1587, a community disappeared. In 2004, 4 people looking for them followed a trail and disappeared too. 2 vanishings, 4 centuries apart, in the same place, under the same sky. What if the mystery of Rowanoke was never meant to be solved? What if understanding comes at a price? The forest here is thick with memory. Step too far, and it swallows you whole. From the marshes of North Carolina, we now travel to the frozen wilderness of Siberia, where a Soviet geologist stumbled across an entrance in the mountains and left behind only a sketchbook of symbols and a warning, "Don't send anyone." There are places the earth itself seems to guard. In August 1989, deep in the desolate ranges of eastern Siberia, Soviet geologist Anatoly Moskvin was conducting a routine mineral survey, or so it seemed. A veteran of the terrain, Moskvin was accustomed to solitude, harsh weather, and the vast silence that stretches endlessly across the Russian wilderness. On August 3rd, he radioed something unexpected. "My instruments are picking up anomalies, metallic signatures in the valley. Not geological. It looks like an entrance. Artificial. Very old. I'm going to document it." He was alone that day. His partner had fallen ill and returned to base. Moskvin, methodical and fearless, went on. 6 hours later, another transmission came in. This one was broken, almost frantic. "Don't send anyone. Tell them," then static. Rescue teams reached the site 3 days later. His tent was intact, equipment still humming, recording the same anomalous readings. His journal lay open. The last page showed sketches, geometric symbols, notations, sharp-edged shapes that resembled no known writing system. Beneath the drawings he'd written, "Entrance confirmed, symbols on the wall, not geological, not natural, going in." But there was no sign of an entrance, only a rock face and disturbed earth, as if something had been uncovered, then buried again. Moskvin was never found. Colleagues dismissed it as a tragic accident, a fall perhaps, a misstep. But after the Soviet Union collapsed, whispers began to emerge. Stories from the indigenous Evenki people, tales of the old doors, places their ancestors sealed long ago, warning that bad spirits lived beneath. One former teammate claimed the government had recovered Moskvin's camera, but the film was lost or hidden. Officially, there was nothing. Unofficially, something had been found, then covered. Why did Moskvin's last words plead for silence? Why did he want to stop others from coming? Perhaps he realized too late that the anomaly wasn't meant to be studied. Some doors are closed for a reason. From the vast emptiness of Siberia, we shift now to the lush, vertical jungles of Papua New Guinea, where an anthropologist was led to a sacred site known only to one tribe, a place they called the Stone Place, a place where, they said, the old ones sleep. The jungle rose like a wall, green and ancient. In July 1972, Australian anthropologist Dr. Emily Brennan led a small team into the remote highlands of Papua New Guinea. Her goal was to study a tribe reportedly untouched by the outside world. What she found was something far older and far more enigmatic. The tribe welcomed them slowly, cautiously. Brennan's radio dispatches over the first week were filled with cautious optimism. The team was making progress, learning the language, documenting rituals, building trust. Then, on July the 12th, everything changed. "We've been accepted," Brennan reported. "Tomorrow they're taking us to a sacred site. They call it the Stone Place, where the old ones sleep. No outsider has ever been allowed there. We'll document everything." It would be her last full transmission. On July 13th, just after noon, a burst of static erupted on the team's frequency. Then chaos, screams, shouts, muffled sounds of running. And then, a single clear voice, trembling. "They're awake." Then silence. When rescuers arrived 2 days later, the camp was still there. Tents standing, equipment scattered, plates half filled, food left uneaten. But Brennan and her team, gone. More unsettling, the tribe was gone too. 300 people, vanished. Their homes empty, cooking fires cold, paths overgrown as if abandoned in haste. No signs of violence, no sign of where they went. The jungle gave no answers. What was the Stone Place? Legends told of stone chambers, sleeping ancestors, and strict taboos about disturbing the site. Some believed it was a burial ground. Others something more metaphysical, a boundary between worlds. Was it a tomb, a vault, a place holding something forgotten or forbidden? No bodies were found, no clues except the final words Brennan spoke into her radio. "They're awake." Awake from what? Official reports blamed a natural disaster, perhaps a landslide, perhaps disease. But there was no physical evidence of either. The site was sealed, the region restricted, the files closed, the forest returned to stillness as it always does. But the story lingers, not just of a lost expedition, but of an entire people who led strangers to something sacred, and then disappeared into myth. From the haunted canopy of Papua's highlands, our path turns now to the coldest silence of all, the glacial vastness of Antarctica, where, beneath miles of ice, one scientist found geometry where there should have been none. Antarctica doesn't whisper. It waits. In November 2002, glaciologist Dr. James Martinez was stationed alone at a remote research site in the Trans-Antarctic Mountains. He was there to study ice layers and ancient climate records, standard work, methodical and slow. But what he found was not standard. On November 14th, he sent a short email to a colleague. Found something impossible. There's a structure under the ice. Artificial. Geometric. Definitely not natural. Taking samples tomorrow. If this is what I think it is, it changes everything. He signed off with a promise to explain in person. He never returned. 2 days later, a helicopter arrived for his scheduled pickup. The camp was orderly. Tent intact, equipment arranged, his laptop still open, the email on the screen. But Martinez was gone. So were his ice samples, his camera, and his field journal. The storage containers for cores were empty. There were no tracks, no signs of a struggle, just absence. Half a kilometer from camp, searchers found a drill site, bore holes and disturbed snow where someone had extracted deep ice samples. But the holes had been carefully refilled and the surface smoothed over. Someone had tried to erase the evidence. That wasn't standard procedure. Scientists typically marked their drill sites for future reference. Martinez had done the opposite. He had concealed his work. Why? Satellite imagery of the area, later reviewed, showed faint radar anomalies under the ice, reflections consistent with solid structures, not rock or ice formations. Martinez had known about them. He'd talked about investigating them someday. Someday had come. The search for him was called off after weeks. Antarctica is merciless. Most vanishings are attributed to crevasses or exposure. But not this time. Not with a concealed drill site. Not with no trace. In 2010, a former colleague published a quiet paper. He'd examined newer satellite images of the site. The drill area had been reopened. Excavated again, then refilled. No research team had claimed responsibility. Who had returned? What did Martinez find that made him hide it, even from his own colleagues? What structure lies buried beneath that ancient ice sheet? His last words linger, unshakable. If this is what I think it changes everything. From the sterile cold of Antarctica, we now turn to the final chapter of Disappearance. A mosaic of stories scattered across continents, yet bound by the same thread. Explorers who reached the edge of revelation and never crossed back. Patterns are rarely accidents. 10 explorers. 10 moments of contact with something ancient, something unknown. Some followed maps. Others followed myths. All were driven by one idea, that there was still something out there worth finding. And in each case, the same haunting rhythm. A final message. A breakthrough. A promise of revelation. Then disappearance. They came from different times, different places. A British surveyor in the Amazon. A young artist in the Utah canyons. An heir among the tribes of New Guinea. A glaciologist beneath Antarctic ice. Their paths never crossed, yet their stories rhyme. And more unsettling still, it's not just their bodies that vanished. Their records, their samples, their cameras and journals. All gone. As if the act of discovery was enough to erase them. Some believe these are coincidences. Tragic, yes, but explainable. accidents in remote places, nature reclaiming what's hers. But the missing evidence suggests more than mere misfortune. If these were deaths by misstep or storm, why would the documentation disappear? Why would a raft drift perfectly intact, but with a journal missing? Why would a geologist's rope be cut, his symbols left behind, but no trace of him beyond? Why would researchers vanish while their untouched gear waits in a car, except for the one thing that mattered, their notes? Something about these stories resists closure. They aren't just tales of people who died doing what they loved. They are stories where discovery and disappearance are bound so tightly that one seems to trigger the other. It's as if some threshold was crossed, one not marked on any map. Perhaps it's not what they found, but that they found, the moment of truth too sharp, too heavy for the world to absorb. Perhaps the things we seek, forgotten cities, sealed vaults, buried geometry, remain hidden, not because they're gone, but because something ensures they stay that way. And those who glimpse them? They become part of the silence. There's no conspiracy here, no shadows pulling strings, only a world that may be stranger than we admit, more guarded, more ancient, more alive with memory. The explorers didn't just vanish. They became the missing pages in a book still being written. And that brings us to our final part, where we step back from the edge, gather what remains, and ask the question that haunts all discovery. What does it mean to know something no one else can ever see again? Some stories are never told, not because they're lost, but because they were never returned. Across jungles, deserts, glaciers, and stone, 10 explorers crossed a threshold. Some chased legends. Others followed data. Each believed they were on the brink of revealing something extraordinary, not to conquer it, but to understand it. And then they were gone. We are left with fragments, a final journal entry, a carved name in rock, a sketch of unknown symbols, a rope cut clean. The world moves on. Files are closed. Expeditions are shelved. Nature reclaims the trails. And yet something remains. The feeling that these vanishings are more than accidents, that each is a punctuation mark in a much older story. Not all discoveries are meant to be shared. Some knowledge waits patiently, sealed behind stone, beneath ice, under root and ash. When disturbed, it doesn't strike back. It erases. We romanticize explorers. We imagine glory, flags planted, names in textbooks. But the real explorers, the ones who disappear, rarely leave monuments. Only silence. Only the spaces where their stories used to be. And perhaps that is the monument, a reminder that we are not the first to wonder, not the first to reach, not the first to be humbled by the unknown. Each of these explorers stared into a place that defied explanation. Each felt the pulse of something older than language, something sacred, not in the religious sense, but in the human one, a recognition that mystery itself is a kind of truth. So what do we do with these stories? We tell them, not to solve them, but to remember, to keep the questions alive, to remind ourselves that the world is still wild at its edges. That discovery carries risk, not only of danger, but of transformation. Once you see something you cannot explain, you are never the same. And if you never return, perhaps that too is a kind of legacy, because long after the names fade, the silence remains. And in that silence, a question. What did they see? As we close this journey, we turn not to conclusions, but to a deeper wondering, a human impulse as old as fire. To step beyond the known, to send the forgotten, and to ask always what lies just beyond the map. They were seekers: Fawcett, Ruess, Rockefeller, the Hydes, Gwen, Johansen, Webb, Moskvin, Brennan, Martinez. 10 names, 10 final footsteps into the unknown. They didn't chase fame, not in the way we think of it. What they sought was quieter, more enduring. a sense that something vast and forgotten still lingered just beyond reach. They listened to stories others dismissed, followed trails that had long since gone cold, trusted instincts that led them into silence. And we remember them not because of how they lived, but because of how they vanished. Each story leaves a shape behind, a negative space carved by absence, a place where someone once stood and said, "There's something here," and then gone. We speak of lost cities, forbidden caves, sacred sites, impossible geometries. But perhaps what these explorers truly found wasn't an object or a place. Perhaps it was a moment, a rare collision between past and present, myth and matter, where the world revealed something of itself, then quickly withdrew. And maybe that is why they never returned, because to see such a moment is to step outside of the ordinary world, to witness something so profound that returning becomes impossible, not by force but by choice, or by quiet design. It's tempting to demand answers, to comb through maps, logs, coordinates, to rebuild the stories and insist on resolution. But maybe it's not resolution we need. Maybe it's reverence. These stories ask us to consider the limits of our knowledge, to honor the possibility that some truths resist capture. That wonder is not something to be solved, but protected. We live in an age of data and precision. But these disappearances remind us of something older, the pulse of myth, the power of unanswered questions, the dignity of not knowing. So as we close this journey, let us not ask where they went. Let us ask instead, what moved them to go? Let us remember the courage it takes to follow a thread into darkness, the humility to hear old voices in wind and stone, and the grace to vanish, not in fear, but in awe. They are not lost. They are part of the mystery now, and the map remains unfinished.